Welcome to the Cognitive Rampage podcast. We are going live here, YouTube. Welcome. As always, podcast will be posted soon. Tomorrow, you will see Dr. Stanton Peel's podcast hit iTunes and everywhere else. He's been on YouTube for a while. I have gotten all the emails. I'm sure he has too. So thank you very much. Now, the gentleman on the podcast currently, I probably could do an intro, but it would take a 13-minute TED Talk to do so. So the titles that come along with this, man, I actually can relate, and I'll probably end up telling a little bear story along the way. But, Stephen, I would introduce you, but, I'd like to hear your introduction because it's a good one. Stephen, man, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, man. I'm happy to be here.
So your titles as of current would be?
Okay. Man, it's been so long since I did the riff, and my titles are much more concise now than 3.5 years ago. I am currently a writer and director for film and television, and on the rare occasion theater if it comes my way. I am also applying for grad school in film on the West Coast exclusively, and I am in the middle of co-producing, co-creator, directing a feature-length documentary. It is a cross-country flight with my best friend David Grabowski. He and I are recreating the first transcontinental flight in American history, done by a guy named Cal Rogers in 1911, so 105 years ago in September. We're doing it in reverse, going from California to New York. He went from Brooklyn to California. I am also in cahoots with a good friend of mine named Aaron Smith, who runs Potential Within Reach. He is an ADHD coach. And I and he have officially established Attention Different, which is a new company supporting all things attention different. He himself has ADHD. He and I met at the National Convention for Children and Adults with ADHD last year in New Orleans, hosted by Chad. And so I'm working on, that portion of my public speaking career. Also, Aaron has convinced me to pretty seriously investigate getting a life coaching certificate with an emphasis in ADHD coaching if I so choose. So let's see, the titles right now are writer, director, public speaker, producer, and maybe life coach. And for a little bit there, I was a bartender to make all the ends meet in New York.
I mean, I can relate, man. Those that know me know that I have done just about everything under the sun or have tried it once. And when someone sent me your talk, a member of the Tribe of Change sent me your talk, and I watched it. And for me, I'm at the Rampage. We kind of go not against diagnosis, but just different perspective, different ways of looking at what they call outside of the norm. So
right.
Your approach to it it captured me, right, on how you approached how you used it and how you chose to perceive this. Now, let's face it, subjective in its own diagnosis, as most mental health diagnoses are. Can I walk with you, if that's okay, into that childhood part and how the teacher was the diagnosis? I mean, what were you showing? I mean, take me back there, walk me through that if you can, man.
Sure. So the section in the TED Talk from 2013 is pretty accurate. I was the section regarding auditioning for a new school in Dallas. So I had moved from Louisiana to Dallas, and my first grade teacher in Louisiana told my parents, hey, be on the lookout for ADHD. I'm sure at the time she probably said ADD, right? So at the time there was a difference between the two. Now we know that that's not the case, that there are 3 subgroups of ADHD. There is no such thing as ADD. There's just ADHD type 1, type 2, and type 3. So my first grade teacher said, watch out, I think this kid has ADD. My parents weren't really sure what that was, but lo and behold, when I was meeting with my parents on my left and right with for second grade at a school in Dallas, we were all talking, or the teacher was talking to my parents, they were talking about the program, asking questions. And I was leaning left and right in my chair, trying to see behind this teacher because there were a bunch of kids playing with a big ball outside. Right. It was recess. And I leaned so far to the left or right that I fell out of my chair, coincidentally at the moment that they were talking about whether or not I was ADHD or ADD. And I fell onto the floor. So my teacher, that teacher that I was being interviewed by, also knew a little thing or two about ADD and said, you know, just from sitting in this office for an hour with you guys and watching Stephen fidget and ask a lot of questions, he's clearly very positive and excited, but it's hard. Like, there were very few boundaries. Ostensibly, it was very interruptive. It was very impulsive. Not that it was mean spirited or harsh or abrasive, but just, constant. Like I have a question, leaning, not sitting down, that sort of thing. So she suggested that I get tested, which I did, sometime between the age of 8 and 10. I can't quite remember exactly when, and surprisingly enough, not really. My parents can't really either, but somewhere between the age of 8 and 10, having lived in Dallas for a few years, I got officially tested. I went through the neuropsych evaluation. It took 2 weekends, I think, and came out ADD. I was officially stamped ADD around that age, about 8 to 10. And from then on, most certainly at 10, I was taking 5 milligrams of Ritalin 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and at home for homework, once middle school had rolled around. And it was your classic, it was your sort of the cliche symptoms for young boys with ADHD, full of energy, what seemed like boundless energy from 7 a.m. until I reportedly, according to my mother, crashed hard at like 9 p.m., with just full out energy, talking very fast, impulsive decisions, very excited, very excitable, all the huge, as they say, whereas my peers were, respected rules and boundaries more consistently. I had classmates who'd raise their hand 2 or 3 times, or if at all, during a class time. And pretty much every class period, I was raising my hand 10, 15 times, shouting out answers, that sort of thing. So the classics definitely distinguish me from the rest of the pack.
Yeah, that when I start walking through that territory, man, I can't help but start to get kind of upset because, I think, why not modify the education system that's creating mostly non-critical thinking drone likes that are just spitting them out to be on assembly line type. But, when I think, this person, this individual doesn't fit into the spectrum that we deem normal, and thus, the pharmaceutical approach, jumps in, and obviously, but those labels also kind of hurt, when you begin to put them on. And I think they freely throw those labels around, and people like teachers that may witness things, a lot of times still aren't the ones to be, judging. And, the neuro test you mentioned is one of the closest ones to being accurate on under the criterion of that diagnosis for sure. Some of the brain studies that we had, I think it was not Dr. Carl Hart. I was Dr. Carl Hart, as well as Dr. Andrew Hill, that the closest test that we have for brain imaging for ADHD is ADHD, I should say. That basically no other brain test kind of works for any other mental disorder. They think there's I'm not my lane, but there's a gathering kind of in the top part that they can tell on some brain imaging that may, kind of lead to it. So, for me, it's difficult because I was blessed with that indirectly by many labels, along the way. I mean, the story I say I would tell quickly is we're Native American, and half in my family, and so my name before Swimming Bear, before I became older, was Little Bear, and Little Bear had a story to what always causing an issue. So the farmers and the bears got along fine, but the little bear would come along and he would pull down the first ear of corn. He'd start to eat it, but before he finished it, the next one looked too good. And then he's chewing on this one. Then he's on the next one. He never finishes it and he causes an issue. Well, that was my name. So I related to this talk, to this experience, to the labels, to the indirect labels, to the testings. And now that, long period out, and I loved what you did with it, man. You changed the whole perception, man. You obviously didn't like the feeling of the drugs, right? The sedation.
So a few things, and I'll start with semantics. So I by nature of having very supportive parents. I won't say always positive because that's too much of a wash. Everyone is entitled to their negative opinion at times, but constantly supportive. So never lacking support. I was blessed with parents who empowered who I was, even if there were critical opinions or if they pointed out at any time that I was missing the mark or missing the gap, or if sometimes, sometimes it's not just ADHD, sometimes it's just, sometimes laziness or tiredness or wanting to play video games instead of read history, your history textbook, which can be applied to any student, right? Regardless of a mental disorder. I had parents that navigated those waters, but no matter what, were supportive. And what that created, along with teachers who were supportive, was a confident identity with ADHD. And I thereby treated it as something I was. This is what I tend to believe, not that I had. So generally speaking, you have a disorder or an illness, right? She has the flu. She has a cough. She has a cold. She has, mono, whatever it is. But you often hear he or she is autistic. She is ADHD. She is bipolar, is schizophrenic, right? Which is a really interesting, say again?
Yeah, they become the label. They identify with the label.
You are it. Mm-hmm. Now, curiously enough, I championed that from a very early stage because I was instilled with confidence and positivity, mostly. I was excited to be ADHD. I liked having a bunch of energy. I like the fact that now at 25, I'm able to get 5.5 hours of sleep a night and be okay all day, as long as I'm treating myself healthily with nutrition and exercise, et cetera, which is definitely not the case in a freelance film industry. I can get 5.5 hours, 6 hours. I don't need 8. I don't need 10. I get lethargic, actually. And I've loved that since I was in high school and middle school. So I championed being ADHD. I say I am, not have. Now I have friends and creative partners, business associates, classmates, ex-girlfriends, et cetera, who say they have, not are, or did say they had, now they say they are, are going through their own transition or struggle. And I've found that there is a distinct line between those within, under this umbrella of semantics, who say I have versus I am. And that usually tells me something about how a person feels about their mental disorder. I generally feel positively about my disorder and therefore say more comfortably, I am this thing, and I deal with it for its good and its bad. Again, this is a general wash. There could be a perfectly happy person who says, I have this disorder, but I'm okay with it and I'm confident and healthy, et cetera. But I've found that have versus am creates this general divide between those who have been told they have a condition, they have a problem, they have a disorder, right, and it's separate from themselves, versus someone who is told, okay, this is part of your brain, it's part of your character, but let's work with it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing, is that semantically speaking, I have always associated with am. There was a little bit of a flip-flop in the last 3 to 5 years where I was going back and forth, but I'm pretty firmly in the I am category nowadays. The second thing with semantics is that it's a negative diagnosis on its face. So I haven't added this into the talk yet, but there's a new portion that will have to do just with the words attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And I kind of, sardonically, joked with my business partner, Aaron, and my parents, that's 3 negative words and 1 neutral word in a diagnosis. So you're a parent, you don't know anything about the disorder, and you are told by a doctor that your child is deficit hyperactive disorder, right? That's a scary, you're lacking in something, there's a mental disorder, and it's hyperactive, it's all over the place, it's hard to control. That's the first thing you hear, is that your child is, 3 parts negative, 1 part neutral, right? Something to do with attention. And I didn't like that. I couldn't put it that concisely when I was in college, but that's what I was reacting to when I gave the talk and when I reframed it, attention different, because I liked saying I am ADHD. but I don't like the fact that the disorder is so saturated in negative like vocabulary, like straight on. So I wanted to champion this philosophy that I am this thing, but I wanted to do away with the negative connotations of the label. So I changed it to attention different. I am attention different. I am different than my classmate. I am different than my roommate. Actually, at the time, my roommate Adam was like hardcore ADHD. So the four of us the same. But I liked this notion of being, this is my brain. You cannot separate ADHD for me. It's impossible. It is a chemical imbalance in my head. It is an improper balance of norepinephrine, dopamine, and at times adrenaline, right, and endorphins. So it's chemical. It's in my head. In my head is in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, my brain is my soul, like is the engine, is the computer, right? So if the computer has a chemical imbalance, then I am that chemical imbalance, and I work with that. But I didn't like this hardcore negative, so I spun it to attention different.
Well, there are a few powerful things here, man, at play from coming from a mental counselor standpoint. And, wow, because when I used to work with, people dealing with addiction, etc., the idea of claiming that, hi, my name is and I'm an addict is detrimental because, what you reference as semantics, I would actually tell you is very powerful. I mean, you're talking about.
I give it power. Sorry to interject. I think I am part of the Stephen Fry lineage of people who believe that words have very, very, very serious power, and that
you're a writer. So, I mean, yeah, it's coming that way. So, but there's two things, though, that because typically I would say, look, claiming that we are something generally has the self-fulfilling prophecy attached. But you had two powerful things, though, that are different that most that experience what you have don't. I mean, first, we all understand that ADHD is a very wide spectrum at this point.
Yes, massive.
So, right. So, but you had the positive support and the epigenetic influence to your development. This is, I mean, Aubrey de Grey, Dr. Underpat, these people would say, look, this is why. You had this epigenetic influence that was positive to a point, as you said. But from a cognitive standpoint, I don't know why I would lean that way. but from a framing standpoint, the power that you chose to accept what ADHD was, but then use your power of perception to frame it in a way for you that actually what I noticed brought to you a level of awareness. Like now, because I'm aware of what this is, I can then apply it as necessary, almost like a superpower.
It's an age-old cliche, but it's super accurate, as many cliches go. Knowledge is power, and lack of knowledge creates fear, breeds fear. So when I can't count on two hands, I can't count on a calculator how the number of young adults, teens, young adults, and adults who I've encountered who either weren't diagnosed until their late 20s, are pretty sure they might be ADHD and have not been diagnosed yet, and are in their early 30s, their mid 20s, late 20s, and particularly that latter group. But that former group, those who've been diagnosed late, can account, are terrified because there is this constant pressure to finish tasks or to finish things or reach goals on time based on our Western culture of success, driving for success, and etc. And this consistent mental block or inability to, as you say, going from corn stalk to corn stalk, right? The next thing looks so tasty. I can't count on two hands how the number of people who I've met who are afraid, who are so afraid, they either haven't been diagnosed yet, or they tell me about how afraid and frustrated they were for years, not knowing why they were having these challenges, while also having a brain and a spirit and a gumption that they know deep down is strong, is excited, creative. Most of these people I've talked to will say, I have so many ideas. right? I've heard that phrase, but I have so many ideas. I have 10,000 ideas every day that I know are good ideas. I know they're not bad ideas. I know they're good, but I can't do anything about them. Or I try, and then, I've tried 1,000 of them in the last 20 years and finished one of them, or finished none of them. And for me, that early diagnosis, very early, 8 to 10, is really a blessing considering the year in which I was diagnosed, right? So 19.
In the severity.
Yeah, exactly. So when I was diagnosed at age and the time in, the early 2000s when I was diagnosed, I got very lucky because I was able to take charge of it. I knew what it was early on, and I had the appropriate amount of time in my developmental years to overcome fear of it, right? Now, and this is I'm happy to share this with anyone. Now I have I may sound like I'm a little bit more than ADHD. I might be a little psychotic in a cafe when I'm talking to myself. But now I have this now I have this fun, almost like Matthew Broderick from the movie Lady Hawk. He's talking to God and himself. But I have this communication with my it's almost like Jekyll and Hyde, but I don't feel split personality. It's it's a conversation with me, and I'll leave the keys somewhere and say, don't forget you put the keys right there. And this little voice in my head is saying, you could just attach it to your belt. You know you're going to forget it. And 5 minutes later, where are the keys? And I find them and I have a conversation with myself, like, you idiot, what, and then we laugh about it. I laugh with me about it, but I can only have that level of comfort and that level of confidence with my ADHD and me, because of, as you said, the positive support that I had and the very early knowledge of what it was. Knowledge is so powerful that even the negative connotations of the disorder are more easy to overcome when you learn early. It's kind of one of the shames of those who are diagnosed with manic bipolar 1 or even later bipolar 2, where you really don't know you have it until right around college. End of high school, college is usually on average when the first major trigger happens for manic bipolar 1. And that's a really...
Unless trauma.
And of course, unless severe trauma, or what's now on the horizon, ADHD bipolar.
Well, I'm sorry to jump in, man.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we get too far,
yeah.
You were talking about those diagnosed late. And I've done a few rampages on this. I've been doing this for a while now, but
yeah,
kind of researching on my own, as well as I'm researching what I believe to be athletes' depression as a real diagnosis, which I'm aiming to get into the DSM eventually. But that book will be out in August. But I've referenced. I kind of didn't mean to find this little etiology I discovered while I was researching that, and actually what I was finding other people too, people that are actually in the medium to low end of ADHD, actually over time can end up more severe with other issues. Because what ends up happening, you actually talk through it, is when you're kind of low end, you're never quite sure. So you never really become aware or do anything. And then the pressures of life go on 5, 10, 20 years. And obviously you not being able to focus, finish, etc., and even cultivate good social relationships because it's hard to connect at the same time. So people see you differently, but then they see doctors, etc. Well, then it looks like depression early. And then over time, they get spurts using that superpower of ADHD where they're going to come out of the gate swinging, and then they fail again because of focus, and then the depression sets in. And what you see over a 15-year span are misdiagnosis of bipolar, when truthfully, it was just a low-end spectrum ADHD that the person went unaware with over time.
I hear what you're saying, and that makes a lot of sense, particularly with ADHD women, adult women with ADHD. I know it's now I understand why you brought in severity earlier. right now, as the trend goes, unfortunately, ultimately, young boys are much easier to spot with ADHD. And the reason is, generally speaking, again, not everybody, but generally speaking, young boys are more extroverted ADHD, not extroverted, but outwardly ADHD. They question authority before they question themselves, right? So boys are like, they're like ego, ego, ego. Why are my teachers treating me this way? Why do I have so much homework? Why do I have to study so much? Why can't I go outside? Whereas young girls with ADHD usually ask the question, what's wrong with me? Why am I not like my girlfriends? Why am I not like my group? Why can't I finish this? Why can't I do this? And so they're more quiet about it. Also, where boys aren't really as much Calvin and Hobbes as far as like fantasy going, they're very again, a general curve. They can be very physical with their ADHD at a young age. They're very physically impulsive, running, jumping off trees, wrestling, by fighting their friends, etc. Whereas
the culture environment there also is
exactly, boys are more encouraged to go outside and wrestle around and play football, whereas exactly, there's a cultural environment preset for boys to be more physically ADHD, whereas signs and symptoms from young girls, again, are more spacey. They're more in their head. So a young girl with ADHD may be less prone to interrupt in class, but rather she sits in the back of the room and is daydreaming the entire 45 minutes or an hour and a half, and at the end of the class wakes up and says, oh my God, I didn't listen to anything. And then, a difference that's trending right now between young boys and young girls is shame in young girls, like developing shame at a very early age and it getting really serious by the time they may be diagnosed in their early 20s, teens, early 20s. That shame has really set in. This deep rooted feeling of I am wrong, something is broken about me. Whereas boys can develop an anger, a testiness, even deeper impulsivity. F it, I'm going to do whatever I want to do what I want. They're wrong, right? That accounts in my readings and in my whatever studies that I've done for that depression that you speak of. But the argument is extremely compelling, and I believe it, that it's interesting, the small to the moderate to intermediate symptoms. So if you're on that scale, if you're on the lighter end of the scale, there's not this idea that it goes unchecked and then develops into anxiety or depression legitimately.
and mostly bipolar misdiagnosis.
Exactly. Well, and if you wanted to springboard off of that, I know that the UK in the last 5 to 10 years has been having a real bad time with misdiagnosis of bipolar with depression. They are diagnosing patients who come in with depression because you only go to the therapist. This is a dumb reason, but kind of one of those sinister reasons. You only go to the therapist when you're sad, not when you're manically happy. So they're diagnosing.
Reactive, yeah.
Yeah, so they're diagnosing kids with depression when they actually have bipolar, and they're mismedicating. So I can absolutely jump on the train that jump on the track that's trending towards misdiagnosis at an early age that develops into something deeper and more sinister. And I've absolutely heard stories of that at Last Chad in New Orleans, and met people with signs of that reality. That makes sense with that story.
Yeah, it does, man, because they'll have these spurts to where they have one of those great ideas, they pick it up, they run with it, and people think, okay, they're fine, and then it's the failing of idea after idea after idea, and it begins to look like something else. And over time, it really does develop. It's the awareness you talked about is so key, man. And the bipolar diagnosis, comes over time. I get a lot of shit for it, but I say that when a doctor that prescribes antidepressants is practicing out of his scope, because a 7-minute meeting with somebody and a few questions, and most of the time the new doctors take a little more, but a lot of doctors, no psych classes whatsoever. So are you sad? Are you this? They ask the questions that the drug peddlers tell them to, so well, you mentioned also a misdiagnosis of the reason that can be very bad and detrimental to a true bipolar diagnosis, is if you give someone who's a bipolar an antidepressant for the first 2 or 3 days, they're like, it's the God revealed, to where they're like, oh, it's great, everything's better. And in about 4th day, oh my, you will cycle faster. it actually will cause someone bipolar to cycle faster between sets when taking antidepressant.
Yeah, it created in the last 5 to 10 years in the UK. It's created a spike in suicides because of the misdiagnosis. I'll plug a doctor who I'm a huge fan of. If you haven't already had on the show, you have to. I was have to. His name is Dr. Olivardia, Roberto Olivardia. I want to say he's the head of psychology at Harvard, but he may just be a psychologist at Harvard, like a resident psychologist. But I saw him last year in November, and he has ADHD. I believe his 4-year-old son has ADHD, and he spent a lot of his early practice researching eating disorders. And he started making linkages to ADHD, bipolar, and other mental disorders to eating disorders. And then that led to a well of experience with bipolar and ADHD. And now he is one of the expert on bipolar. And he's actually the one who introduced me and this room full of people listening in to the very real potential, in his opinion, for ADHD and bipolar together, which can cause bipolar to happen earlier onset bipolar symptoms in a childhood's life. Regardless, his feeling on primary care physicians versus psychologists versus psychiatrists was black and white. He is an esteemed psychologist, highly intelligent, and like I said, an expert's expert.
That's
and he
prescribing.
Say again.
That's in my. Sorry to jump in. I spat out once.
No, no, of course.
Who should be prescribing?
That's what I thought, and I may have even blurted out to him. However, his feeling is different. He said, "Nope, psychiatrist. Only a psychiatrist. The only person who should be prescribing medication is a psychiatrist after a formal psych visit. A psychologist is in the hierarchy. A psychologist is better than a primary care physician,
right?
And a psychiatrist is the best of the best.
Well, I mean, so their job. They do the pills for mood disorder, brain disorder. That's what they do.
And unfortunately, the trend has swung very significantly the other way. I was diagnosed by a primary care physician. Yep. I was screened is the correct term, actually. I was screened by a primary care physician. I was formally diagnosed by a psychiatrist. But I met with predominantly and was prescribed my medication by a pediatrician, my pediatrician. And I've said this before in other shows and to other educators for ADHD. My pediatrician was the shit. Loved the guy. We had a very open, vulnerable relationship. Super cool guy, kind of like a cool dude in his mid-30s, late 30s that I looked up to. But to your point, and to the point of many other doctors that I've met, PCPs, they didn't have more than a segment of a chapter on ADHD in their medical textbooks. I've heard it time and time again. Education on mental disorders is vastly improving, but for your regular old MD, doctor training, residency and training, etc., ADHD, autism, bipolar are not explored as deeply as they should or could be. And because of that, because of that and the reality that mostly primary care physicians are diagnosing kids these days, you've got an imbalance in correct diagnoses, and then arguably more significant or more unhealthy is after the diagnosis, a severe drop or gap in monitoring. So I, again, lucky, had a support group of people asking me how I was doing and how I was feeling, how's your appetite, how are the migraines, etc. But that's still not 100% correct monitoring. You should be, if you're doing it correctly, you should be, especially at the age of 10 years old when I was prescribed Ritalin, you should be checking type of medication that's being taken every 3 months to 6 months at the latest. how many milligrams you're taking, what level of a dose affects your mood in the morning, in the evening. There should be journals. It's a serious thing. But I definitely grew up at a time when there was a hint, in my experience, of medicate it and forget it, right? And that is not okay. Primary care physicians are not the first, should not be the first gate. They often are, and it makes sense. There's no shock as to why it happens. Your child is sick or your child is acting out. Where do you go? The doctor. Easy, right? Where do I go? My pediatrician. So that's why the onus ends up falling on them. So it's not entirely their fault, but it is a shame. It shouldn't be that way. The education is too poor. The price of psychiatrists is too high. You should be going to the person who knows the most about a disorder or any, or mental disorders at all, not the person who went through many, many years of a vast amount of medical training to get a little bit of a lot, right? And then specialize later. So yeah, I echo what you're saying, and I too have had have heard negative experiences and had my own gray experience with teachers and PCPs diagnosing and prescribing, when the people who should be doing that are psychiatrists, and psychiatrists alone, and a psychologist if you're lucky as well.
Yeah, there was a time though when the psychiatrist, when it was common to also be doing psychotherapy. That was a common practice, and the more insurance sped up, the more it became time sensitive. Many psychiatrists stopped doing psychotherapy along with it, and that's where kind of psychologists came in, and they started bringing on nurses and LCSWs, right? And LCSWs don't have quite the research that LMHCs do in mental health diagnosing, but technically counselors are more like caseworkers, so all that is kind of split up. I did an interview. He is quite an expert on bipolar too, and he's going to kill me if I don't remember his name. One of the first interviews that we did back when the studio was so terrible. It was this crappy little office that we had with private practice with my mentor, Leo Danabal, this yellow office. And I had this shitty camera from an angle holding the view. But I should find his name now. I'm clicking on the back, but he's the guy that was really adamant and was talking about the misdiagnosis issues with a depression and bipolar, and then giving the antidepressants to someone that's actually bipolar. He brought up a ton of things. We talked, I think, 2 hours or so on the show. There we go. He's got him somewhere around here. Well, I thought I'd get lucky clicking on some of these late ones, but man, Doctor, he is going to get mad at you, Steven. He will call me too. That's what I mean. He's going to listen to this and call me and say, you know what? You were talking to, I gave you, there it is. Dr. Louis Brodsky. Yeah. Gotcha, buddy. Gotcha, Louis. He is a man of many parts as well. Him and I used to sit and eat lunch together when I was working in clinical in the hospital. And this guy would just talk about all kind of diagnosis, but he was a musician. He was a comedian. He did so many things. And then later he's kind of like, well, maybe you now know why I understand what we've been talking about other than, psychiatry. And he's one that still does psychotherapy, that he will sit and still talk to you. And I think the insurance somewhere is a point at the end of this, maybe, or a question, but I think that insurance push, right? That hurry up, get it done, 30 days, 60 days, that it causes. So I sound like I'm attacking MDs, and I don't mean to. The idea is they too feel pressure to
absolutely
move patients, insurance crushing on them. Everyone is truly affected by the system. For me, it's the system of operation. And what you do, Steven, I think needs to go much farther, and you need to write something more psychological about what you did, because there's an approach there, because it's the cognitive approach you took with the perception change along with the awareness and the positive, this is a new approach. This is something, and look what you do. I mean, come on, you're the Wheaties box of it. So
I appreciate it.
but think about it, you know, so it's a totally different approach, man. I think you should definitely walk down some psychology path of some book, writing a new approach to, I don't even want to say treating it, maybe a new approach to accepting it.
Well, you give me a great plug. I'm very appreciative. And also a good place to talk about attention different and what Aaron and I are trying to do. So Aaron and I, up to this point, Aaron is very much what I'll call the academic of the two of us. Both of us read plenty of articles. We're both in the scene, so to speak. But Aaron is the Columbia master's degree holding social worker who's been, you know, he's in his early 30s. I'm 25. He would know
Dr. Carl Hart then. If he's out of Columbia, he would probably.
Aaron is very on top of it, very on top of the scene. He's, you know, my time spent with him when we meet back when I was living in New York. I just recently moved out. We were meeting at our healthiest once, if not twice a week, to discuss this new company or this brand, this movement. We call it a movement, the Attention Different movement. He is my real-time educator, right? So I have my own therapist, actually another plug, Eric Tibbers, who you may be aware of. He has the ADHD Rewired podcast and is also, he has ADHD. He speaks at CHAD often, and is just a wonderful, sweet, beautiful man. I was part of his CBT group earlier this year and an extension of that. So between Eric and Ari Tuckman, who is the head of CHAD, and Aaron, my ADHD, my Attention Different business partner, I received my education of these doctors, these psychologists, these speakers, and you know, fellow movement pushers from these people, from particularly Aaron. So yeah, Attention Different and the movement and my relationship to my psychology and how it came to be and how to spread that model around, right? Because it ended up pretty positive. It starts with a shift in representation and presentation of any mental disorder to the person or persons that have it, right? That have or are it, barring which way you go. The way that we present mental disorder is still, it's steeped in taboo, in a melting pot of various cultures' feelings towards a mental disorder, as I'm sure you're very well aware. I mean, there are still many first world countries who grapple actively with the existence or not of ADHD and some mental disorders, let alone third world countries, developing countries, and their feelings towards mental disorders. Even in the United States, there's a racial divide between acceptance of mental disorders, right? So, and there was an unbelievable podcast on death, sex, an episode on death, sex, and money with Jane, and I can't remember her last name. Anna Sale interviewed Jane, the last name starts with a G. She's a Black woman with two autistic sons. And she spoke for the entire episode about the challenges with raising two autistic Black teenagers who will eventually become adults with autism, and her deep, deep fear of how they will be treated in the public. Because her deepest desire is for them to be able to function as adults, but how the public will treat them if they're having an episode. If they are, you know, if at random on a subway train, they can't handle their emotions and lash out, versus a white adult with the same mental disorder. So dialing back, it starts with totally reworking our awareness, right, of mental disorder, period. What is it? What does it actually mean, right? A lot of people think attention different, right? ADHD, can't focus. It's so much richer and more complex than that, right? You got to get to the basics, and that's where Aaron comes in. Aaron is the one who teaches me and reminds me it is norepinephrine, dopamine, and, you know, on occasion adrenaline and endorphins, right? And serotonin. It's serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, and it's an imbalance. Once you know that, and you know that an ADHD person has this much dopamine or norepinephrine versus a neurotypical person, and various things, not just medication, can get us up to that level. Running 30 minutes on the treadmill, exercise, treating yourself to an activity that makes you really excited, right? And then going back to the, as Eric Tivers calls them, important tasks, important, boring tasks, right? So we have less dopamine or norepinephrine. We have to get to that neurotypical level, and then we can be champions, right? The ones, you know that knowledge is power and you can work from that, but we don't even know that. We don't teach that well enough. We don't educate people that that's what it is. We don't know. I know more than my average peer, and I couldn't tell you right now actually what the chemical imbalance is for manic bipolar 1. And I know people very close to me who have bipolar, and I couldn't tell you right now. So I'm unaware. I'm naive, right? So first thing is awareness. Second thing is acceptance. Accepting the fact that mental disorders exist, or more positively and more healthily, neurodiversity exists, right? Not the old cliche of it, everyone's a snowflake, right? That's old hat and kind of boring. It's, the brain is extremely complex. There's 7.2 billion people on the planet. There is bound to be some significant differences between you and your neighbor, let alone you and someone born in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Morocco, Tangiers, whatever. There is bound to be a difference. So we have to accept the fact that people's brains are going to inherently be different, sometimes significantly, and be okay with that. And then thirdly, we have to support people through their cognitive diversity, right? And that's where teachers comes in. That's where different work environments come in. Some people really like the open work environment that's taken a hold, where everyone sits at a big table.
Yeah.
A lot of people cannot do that, right? I have some ADHD friends who are like, look, I get it. I love being at a table with 20 of my friends, but I need 3 hours of me time in a office or a closet where I can just make my phone calls, and then I can go back out at the giant laptop lunch table and hang out with the rest of my company, right? So we have, the third thing is support, figure out a way to actually not implicate, not instigate either, but to institute, right? What positive practices, positive mental health practice. And the fourth that I always say is like something I learned from somebody a long time ago, is a leadership council, FIDO, fuck it and drive on. The fourth thing is sort of like a Steven specific thing, which is like, you've only got one life to live. You now are aware of it. You are, you accept that it's a reality. You support it. Now it's time to live your life, right? Start acting, be active, not passive. So if you can accomplish the first three things, which is like a Mount Everest, the fourth thing is fuck it and drive on. Now we need grit. Now you need positivity, keep pushing forward, accept what you are, celebrate what you are. And now, start doing, right? Start whatever it takes, writing to-do lists on your hand, tattooing a to-do list on your body so it's always there. If you are somebody who's ADHD type 2, who fidgets or has like an emotional connection, you're someone who needs to chew on something or swing, or you need that added weight on you, right? You need touch, right? My ex-girlfriend is very, very probably ADHD type 2. So there's like an emotional connection, a physical, psychosomatic connection. Do it. Get the chewy thing, get the weight, tell people that you are this way and start helping yourself out, right? Yeah, I will. So that was a rampage.
No, I was letting you fly. No, I like the approach, man. I mean, it's learning what your tools are, learning your behaviors, how to do it, plotting those tools around you to move them as you need for your specific. I love the customization, man. I mean, look, the Cognitive Rampage is the book itself. Actually, I got to send you one. Make sure you
please do. Yeah, please, absolutely do.
I what's hidden in there actually is a complete approach. It's a total approach actually called transrational structure behavior theory, something that I came up with. That's my deal. But that doesn't sell a book, so the Cognitive Rampage is actually the application of TSBT, of developing this entire theoretical approach. And that's exactly what you're doing there, is this entire different theoretical approach to a very serious, for many, many people. And like we discussed before, even on such a low mid-range level, over time becomes severely detrimental to life. I mean, this is something that needs to be out there, man. Please, write it. write that book, Stephen.
I can promise you that I can promise with full confidence that my work with ADHD and through attention different will continue until I take my dying breath, right? And I will, I thank my lucky stars to have a person like Aaron on board with me to help out, and a jury of, actually, I'm working with a filmmaker named James Castile, who's right now making a documentary about ADHD. He has ADHD, and his camera guy, Doug, and who also has ADHD, Aaron and I are all going to Chad this year in Southern California. It's about an hour south of LA. And we're going to keep plugging. Like, we're going to hit the ground. I have every intention to write down materials on this. It's starting right now as some public speeches. And there have been significant variations on my speech from 2013. Big changes. I made this really hardcore call to arms at the end about teenagers should not be on medication loosely. That has changed significantly. I have grown up, I have matured, and I understand now through deep research and attending CHAD and various conventions or meetings or groups, that if I am going to champion so bombastically a person by person approach, a unique approach, person to person, then I have to understand and accept that on this sliding scale that we both agree exists, there is highly functioning and low functioning, right?
Hey, I like that damn part of it. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm a little biased, but I like that end part. All right, I understand the research, and it makes total philosophical sense, brother.
Yeah.
I'm on board with you. I am, but I'm biased as shit.
Well, so here's where I get a little nuanced, right? There is a medication. I'll leave it unnamed right now, mostly because I can't remember it, but also I wouldn't say it.
Marijuana?
Marijuana. No, I have a funny relationship to marijuana. We'll cover that ground maybe in a few minutes, but I have a very up and down roller coaster relationship to that, without question, because of the Ritalin and Adderall and being ADHD, et cetera. But I have retracted the teenager age group. I will never agree that stimulants, hardcore stimulants such as amphetamines or methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, et cetera, have no lasting effects on the brain or my physique. I think that's bullshit. I have read and heard studies that there are no lasting effects of Ritalin or Adderall or et cetera. It's just not right. There is
It's fine then, right? So we can just smoke some meth, and there are no side effects to smoking.
You just, I mean, I would not compare pure meth to factory produced Adderall, but I will say that there is no way on this earth that a 10-year-old taking Ritalin or Adderall, for me it was Ritalin, which is a pretty outdated medication. I now take Adderall. There is no way that does not have a lasting effect on that person. And the first effect, which should be obvious, is psychological. All right. If you want to talk about it, kind of, I don't know if you know Freakonomics, but I like to use like Freakonomics almost as a philosophy, right? If you want to flip the script a little bit, maybe don't think about the chemicals, or maybe don't think about the physical, right? Loss of appetite, et cetera, et cetera. Think about just the psychological effect of a child in a private school in Dallas, Texas, who has to 3 times a day take 10 milligrams of something because he or she is too hyperactive, right? You cannot convince me that a child in their formative years who is separated from the pack in such a distinct way does not have a long-lasting effect on their character or their psychology.
The developing brain.
Yes, on the developing brain. So even if you struck chemicals from it, which I don't, I think that the migraines that I had for a week or two every summer through middle school and the beginning of high school are proof enough that my body was experiencing withdrawal from Ritalin. If you separate that, even if you separate that, psychologically there is an effect, because our culture is usually, it stigmatizes the mental disorder. So I am that wacky kid. I am that talkative kid. I am that whatever, right? So it's just, it's not, it's too black and white to say, no, you can take this at a young age. So there is a medication that I absolutely disagree with there, that I would go on any news network or interview show or on public record saying that I will never support this. And it is a new form of amphetamine. I don't know if it's an amphetamine, actually. I can't say that honestly, confidently. It is a new form of medication for ADHD for children between 6 and 10. And it is candy coated. So, and that's this huge breakthrough.
Fuck.
And the FDA approved it last year or this year. So it'll start coming out. In fact, I guarantee you they'll be at CHAD this year. They'll have a booth at CHAD. So, and Aaron and I, I'll throw Aaron on the bus here. He and I, we don't support that. I have heard speakers and scientists, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists talk about the physical effects of medicating, you know, young children between 8, 10, like when I started. But it's like one of life's many tough questions, but you have to draw the line somewhere. And I refuse to support the notion of candy coating a very powerful drug for children, because unquestionably we haven't cracked the educational system, because we are 30 something in the world, the United States, in public school education, and we can't figure out how to shift some government funding from some other unnamed areas that we don't need to be funding right now to education. We're going to instead FDA approve a candy coated medication for 6-year-olds so that they'll sit down and be quiet or focus more, right, in kindergarten, instead of spend the very long time. It'll take a bunch of time and a bunch of money to correct the shit show that is the United States public education system, right? Total horrific shit show. Pick your podcast, spin the wheel. Any single one discussing the public school system in the United States is horrifying. Racially divided, sociopolitically divided, class divides. It's a shit show. So instead of spending the amount of time and effort that we should be and desperately need to on that broken system, very broken system, we are instead going to give billions of dollars to a pharmaceutical company that has just been FDA approved to administer a new form of Adderall, basically. But again, I can't confirm if it's amphetamine or if it's a non-amphetamine, right? To 6-year-olds. And that to me is infuriating. That's infuriating. You can convince me about teenagers, even though I think it's still got to be taken so seriously and matched with mindfulness practices, exercise, nutrition, right? Monitoring constantly. I did not receive the appropriate monitoring. I got what my parents and my teachers and my nurses could offer, and they did their best job, and I turned out okay. But we've learned way more. I can understand that when you're 13, 15, 17, which is why I've altered the end of my speech. But I will yell until I am blue in the face that putting any modicum of time and money into medicating 6-year-olds instead of figuring out the shit show that's the public school education is just categorically improper. It is indicative of our Americana Western medicate it and forget it, and it drives me crazy.
Hold on, don't stop talking.
You're getting the anonymous mask.
Let's go to work, man. Let's go to work now.
We are Legion.
No, my point is it gets me all riled up, man. When you start talking in a rampage like that, that's my point is, man, that's the kind of talking we need. That's that real talk, man. I mean, that is what you do it for. But I can't let you end it that way because you won't want to. So for our last, because you'll have podcast remorse. You'll look back. I know you. You're a positive dude. You're a positive dude. You'd look back and be like, I ended that so negatively. So
foreshadowing.
Oh, I fucking love it though, man. That's a rampage. That's how you do it. Now, take the last minute, 2 minutes, whatever, man, and talk to the people that are there, that are not sure about, and I'm personally themselves, not their kids or anything, but themselves, that are either struggling with this diagnosis or sure they are, not what to do. Just, you're greeting them. Just tell them, man. I don't know. Just tell them.
So the first thing I always say is welcome to the tribe. And I've gotten some like mixed reviews on whether or not I should call it a tribe or a community. But you know what? Some of the most compelling evidence for positivity and forward movement comes from communities like the deaf community, who
Hey,
like
the tribe of change, baby. The tribe
yeah,
of change is all us on Facebook too, bro.
I
So,
I I I support it. It's the right vibe. Like welcome to the tribe. It's not an exclusive tribe. It's like welcome to your family, right? Ohana. Welcome to okay. I'll give a short anecdote and then I'll tell you exactly I'll give you my like concise message to any of those with ADHD and struggling with,
you
to
give me that ramp. You give me that ramp.
So I was asked on Eric Tiver's podcast to join his CBT group. And for a moment, for a minute, I was a little holier than thou inside my head. I thought, wait a minute, I gave the TEDx talk. Like, I know I have my problems and I have my issues, but I don't know that I need to spend the money and join this group. I think one-on-one is fine, but I don't know that I need to be, in a group cognitive behavioral therapy session. Even though I had heard a lot about CBT and am a huge champion of it, I kind of got a little holier than thou. But I said I would do it because he said there were a lot of women in the group and he didn't have enough boys, didn't have enough guys. So I also really like the guy and I like what he's about. So I finally said, I'll do it. I joined his group. And up until the very first session, the intro session, where we just spent an hour introducing ourselves, I had that holier than thou thought, I got this. I'm okay. I don't need very much, right? The first meeting, there were 12 of us. And I think as indicative of Steven as it is, I was walking to another meeting and using my phone. That's how much like respect I was giving this process on the first meeting. I was like, I'll do this off the L train when I'm walking in my like film meeting, right? Hearing 12 people talk about like, just say I'm ADHD and here's what I do. And then for the second 30 minutes, just like it was this free talk about where we come from and what we do and what we're about and what our challenges are. I was very near crying at the end with a giant smile on my head because I smacked my forehead. I was like, this is what CBT for ADHD, autism, bipolar is about. It's your family. I was looking into the faces of 11 other people who were from all over the country, who all had very different jobs. One was military, one was financial analyst, one was a therapist, one was this, one that. One's a photographer. And we all shared this really unique similarity that bonded us thicker than blood, right? And I think it was like 10 weeks, right? Those sessions were some of the most powerful experiences I've ever had, just being in a group. So one of the first things that I tell, I would never give it up. One of the first things that I tell somebody I meet who's conflicted is find a group, find a community, join it. Like join, I wish I had one. I'm all over the place. I'm too attention different at the moment. I'm, doing cross-country documentary and filming these things. But Aaron and I are trying to create a group eventually. That's our dream, is to have an online space first, but a brick and mortar space eventually where people can come and peer-to-peer coach each other and help each other out, right? So I say find a group. If it's online, if it's a meetup group, a Facebook group, or a physical one, or a virtual one, find it and join it. Because just hearing other people ask the same questions you're asking and struggle with the same struggles that you are, and finding coping mechanisms and gritting and bearing it through it is worth. There's no monetary value. It's priceless, right? So the second thing that I tell somebody who's struggling with, at these days it's usually adult ADHD. I've gotten quite a few messages from young kids or parents with kids, is don't knock it till you really get it. It's it can be great. You're probably a creator. You're probably maybe not necessarily an extrovert, but very go-getter, very big dreamer. You've probably got big ideas and a lot of impulsive, positive energy, right? So embrace that. Like, almost like let's hold hands or let's hug and let's jump up and down and laugh for like a minute and a half. The fact that like, we're pretty positive, right? You a positive person? Yeah, I'm very positive. Awesome. Let's jump up and like laugh about it. ADHD is fucking awesome, right? Yeah, ADHD is great. And then I go, great. Okay. Now that we've done that, there's a bunch of places you should look into. Chad, you should, if you can spare a dime, you should pay for a meeting or two with a psychologist, with a therapist, a social worker, just someone to talk to as a professional. If you have a certified ADHD coach or life coach specializing in cognitive diversity, they're going to be cheaper and more accessible, and they don't have the same laws about friendship and, being vulnerable with their clients, right? They're not patients, they're clients. So find a coach and talk it out with them. That's the second step. First, embrace it, laugh it out, or find a community. The second thing is reach out to a professional, especially if you're undiagnosed, or especially if you've just received a diagnosis and you're probably an adult with ADHD in that case, unsure of what to do, right? Reach out to a professional, find someone who you can get some more information from. And then finally, again, going back to like the Fido thing, like start acting on it. Start towards memory games, towards to-do list, towards, start practicing mindfulness, start implementing tips and tricks on I hate the phrase, I won't say the guy's name, but there's this idea of crushing your ADHD or controlling your ADHD like it's a wild bull. That's stupid. Start looking up those apps and those tips and tricks on how to work with the better functioning parts of your brain, right? To help, it's almost like, instead of thinking of it as something to defeat or beat or crush, it's something to feed the right fuel. Do you know what I mean? There's this part of your personality that's unique. Your personality is inherently unique because you have ADHD. So feed the positive parts of it. Is there something is there a hobby or an activity you really like doing? Okay, great. Write that down and set aside 45 minutes every day that you get to do that thing, and then go back to your homework, go back to your work. Is there a person you love gabbing with on the phone? Call that person 15 minutes every other day. It'll get your creative juices flowing. Go back to your work. Start, in other words, long story short, start implementing. Right. So I when I run into people who have ADHD and are working it out, I have this discussion. It goes on forever. It can go for 5 hours. If they have to run somewhere, it can be 5 minutes. Hey, I love you. Welcome to the tribe. Go find a professional. Go find a group, and call me or email me. The last a good note to end on, and sort of a shameless plug, is that www.attentiondifferent.org is going to come out very soon. Aaron and I are preparing to publish that in and around the CHAD conference this November 10th to the 13th. And we really want that to be another one of these online communities that people can subscribe to and come for podcasts, vlogs, blogs, tutorials and classes, the full shebang. We're still working out all the kinks, but we're going to be working on that for the next 3 to 5 years. So check that out. Last but certainly not least, on a positive note, I am as attention different as the next one. I got a lot of really lucky Texas Hold'em hands in life and have run with them, but it does not mean that I don't trip and fall a lot. One of the areas that I wish that I push myself more and more to be better at, more on top of, is responding to people who reach out. So if you're someone who's listening to this and has reached out via Facebook or email, or if you have sent me a message on my website, StephenTonti.com, which is just like a shit show as well. Like I spent so little time on that. I deeply apologize for not getting back and I will eventually, right? Keep pinging me. I always tell people, keep emailing me, keep calling me, keep Facebooking me. I am not frustrated. I don't give a shit if you reach out 1,000 times and then I get back on the 1,000th time. I would much prefer that than if somebody reached out to me because they saw the talk and then I didn't get back to them for 2.5 years, right? Which will happen often, right? Too much social media, too many ways to get a hold of me. So last but certainly not least, I am, I love this part of my being. I love this person that I am, heart and mind. The phrase "I wouldn't change a thing" feels right, even though it doesn't sound right. But I wouldn't deeply alter a single thing about me. I work on little things every day, but I wouldn't change anything about it. And that's what I want other people to get to, and it can't, unfortunately, mathematically, that can't be the case for everyone. There is a scale, and I have very, very, very close friends who have severe depression, for instance, who would tell me, "Hey man, I wish I was as positive as you, but I chemically can't." So I ask myself the question: how do we get that person? How do through this insane positivity that I was blessed with, how do we get that person to love the parts of themselves that they can love, that they have room for loving? So I'll end on that 6th note. I want to instill this confidence in people about their brain, that it is okay to be different. It sucks sometimes. Like, it sucks a lot sometimes. I know we brought up manic bipolar enough. That shit is fucking terrifying. That is terrifying, that you might, as a human being, go through a cycle where you white out, where months later you come out of a cycle and you cannot remember what money you spent, what places you went to, who you slept with, who what you said to someone, or recorded yourself doing. That is the stuff of nightmares and fiction novels, right? So I want to preach, or I want to inspire awareness that these disorders exist, that they are real, they are there. I am cognitively different from the 2 people I'm traveling across the country right now. I am cognitively diverse, but that isn't all stigma. That doesn't make me a weak link. That doesn't make me an anchor. I'm not inherently a net negative addition to the team because I'm cognitively diverse. It just means that I bring my own nuances, my own challenges, my own quirks to any group of people, to any task or challenge. And I want to celebrate that difference. I want to celebrate that diversity and allow other people to celebrate that diversity, to celebrate what difference they bring and be accepted and loved, which the cynic will say is impossible in our world or in our country currently. But the Energizer Bunny optimist will be here until I die, fighting the good fight, for love and acceptance.
Hey man, you had me caught. Now do the you got to drop Robin Williams line at this point, because
oh my God, yeah. So when Robin Williams passed away, I cried off and on for 7 days straight in Sacramento, California, and wanted to drop everything I was doing and become an actor and a comedian. I called one of my old professors and I was like, "Hey, I'm having a real bad time. I think I'm going to just emulate Robin Williams' life. I think he's one of the most beautiful people that's ever lived. Challenges and personality quirks included." He said about his own disorder, one of the most powerful things that I think anyone has said about ADHD and, by extension, bipolar. We are all only given a little spark of madness. You mustn't lose it, which is fucking Patch Adams Awakenings. It's like every character he's ever played. You are only blessed with a little spark of diversity. Don't get rid of it. Figure out how to incorporate it into your life, because you've only got one. So why waste, you know what? Why waste years of your life getting rid of something that's not going to go away? Spend much less time, still tough, but spend much less time accepting it and running with it, incorporating it into your life, and tell everybody else to fuck off. I am who I am. Like that, at the end of the day, if I'm being a little blue, like I am who I am. If you can't accept it, that's a you problem. That's not a me problem. That's a you problem. I love me.
Man, that was some deep. You had me there. You're going off, man. Like that's some spotlight shit. I better see some Broadway shit with this TED Talk, man.
Hey, I'm doing another talk at Columbia on the 14th of November with a guy named Brian Kinghorn, he runs the Neurodiversity TC, I think it's called the Neurodiversity Center at Columbia. So check that out. It's at 7:30 p.m. Eastern at Columbia on the 14th of November, I'm pretty sure. So that's the next thing. Yeah. As far as I'm getting my TED Talk again.
I still want to see the Broadway, man. Have you seen that the old John Leguizamo, right, where he does the whole
I love his one-man shows. Are you kidding me? They're amazing. He's unbelievable.
There you go, man. The way you're going off, bro.
It's not the first time I've heard that. I would be honored to have that place that he had on the stage.
Well, we're gonna see it, man. You're only 25, dude. Holy shit. Man, thanks for coming on the show, brother.
Thank you. Honestly, thank you for having me. I can't wait. Send the book along. Aaron and I will devour it. And hopefully we get to see you at Chad one of these years. It's super educational and worth going because it's the tribe again. It's a big group of people who all share the same.
I'd love to come
variations
and talk about my little theory with the low end spectrum ADHD evolution over time. I'd love to come out and talk about that.
It is exactly the place to do that on a national level. And then beyond that, just check in whenever. I'll be back in New York November 13th, and I'll be back for the election, and then I'll be back on the 13th, and then I'm moving to LA end of this year, beginning of next year.
Oh, so man, when you go back to New York, man, you got to look up one of the producers of this show, man. My best friend, Daniel McNamara. He's a filmmaker up there. He's got a film out, Red Tide. He's got a film he's finishing up now, Literature to Larceny.
Oh, wow. Right, yeah.
He's up there, man. You guys should connect. But again, dude, thanks, man. Appreciate you coming on and sharing, man, and getting deep with me, man.
Of course. I really appreciate you having me. It's been a blast.
Hey, man, the mic's yours anytime. So when you got something to spout out or when that that movement's up and running, man, let me know. We'll bring you back on, and I'll add you to our little closed group of the Tribe of Change, man.
Awesome.
There's some cerebral cats in that group, man. Tread lightly.
Rad. No, I need the Olympic training.
Yeah. Oh, it is, man. Trust me. You post some shit and you don't have your research. My tribe will eat you alive, man.
There is no such better practice, than peer-to-peer review.
They eat me all the time. I love them.
Awesome.
That sounds weird. They eat me. That's fucked up. Oh well, man. So, hey, man, let's do it again sometimes, man. Good luck across the country, dude, and we'll stay in touch.
All right. Thanks, man. I'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
See ya.